Hello, everybody. Oh my goodness. We've made it to the end of the month of our 5-part series on mental health awareness called Shattering the Stigma. So I am incredibly honored to be here today. My name is Jen Trum. I am the co-host for this event, and with me is Christy Lamka. Hi, Christy.
Hello. Hi, Jen. Happy to be here. And we're also very happy and excited about our very special guest today. Esha is a provider on Thrive 360. So I've had the pleasure of knowing her for a few years now and hearing her story, which you'll hear shortly. And Esha is a soul alchemist, and she's going to share a lot of wisdom today. And Esha, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jen and Christy, for having me on today. And today is kind of a special day for me, so it's I don't think it's coincidental that I'm here talking about your title, which I love, Shattering the Stigma. I think that is amazing on this particular day, because today is my husband's birthday, who passed away 5.5 years ago. So I feel super honored to be part of this conversation and to be able to give back. Yeah.
And we're happy to have you here. Maybe a good place to start would be explaining what a soul alchemist is.
Yeah, there's so many things that I do, right? I'm a registered yoga teacher since 2007. I've been a licensed massage therapist since 2005. I'm a spiritual director. I'm in training for advanced mindfulness teacher of presence with Eckhart Tolle. I'm also a shaman. And so there are all of these things that I could rattle off all of these titles. But at the end of the day, what do these titles really mean, right? And I just did some rebranding with my website. I was like, what is it that I actually do with my clients? And it's all about transformation. Helping my clients to move from one state, whether they're in grief or any kind of trauma, or whatever what they're experiencing, and we move to a different state of being. And that's transformation. That's what alchemy is.
Yep.
And so I'm like, yeah, I'm helping individuals heal, but from a soul perspective. And so Soul Alchemist was born.
I love that. Yeah, what a great title for what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. And so those of you who read the description for today, you might know what the topic of today is, which is we're going to be talking all about resilience and how to move through times of crisis. And Esha's going to share some amazing tips for doing just that. So I guess with that, Esha, I'll pass it to you. If you want to start with maybe your background and your story and what put you in this position that you're in today.
Yes, thank you. So, the story is it's vast. It feels multifaceted, and that's probably because it is. And in 2017, I had my own yoga studio, and I'd had it for 7 years, and I kept getting the call in at the beginning of 2017 to close. And this is how things work for me. I listen, I listen a lot to my intuition, and so spirit tends to speak to me through this inner knowing, this inner voice that comes in. And so I got the call that it was time to close the yoga studio, and I'm like, no, I don't really want to do that. So there was a little resistance. I had also signed up to take a course that year in Thailand, a course in death and dying, and that course was in July. So eventually I closed. It's about June. I closed the studio, and I told my husband, I was like, yeah, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I'm getting the call in that I need to close this studio. And he was very supportive, and he's like, we'll figure it out. And so I go off to Thailand to take this course. He goes off to Trinidad and Tobago, where he's from, to visit his parents. And he takes the kids, and our children were teenagers at that point. And, we're having a great time in our respective travels. And I remember having this one conversation with him while I was in Thailand, and he was asking me how the course was going. And I was like, oh my God, the course is amazing. I'm learning so much. And I remember, I don't know where this conversation came out of. And this is when I realized it wasn't until much later after he passed away that I realized we were having a soul conversation, soul to soul. But I remember telling him, I'm like, you know, when you die, I'm going to help you cross over. I'm going to do some of this work for you. And we kind of laughed it off. And, you know, he said, are you saying I'm going to die soon? I was like, no. I was like, you're fit, you're healthy. I just want you to know that whenever your time comes, that, you know, all these things that I'm learning, that I'm going to help you to cross over. And so I come home. It's about maybe July 31st. Yeah, July 31st into the 1st, into August 1st. And they're on their way home. They're at the airport. But he never makes it home. And so long story short, he ends up dying of a pulmonary embolism. And that happened at the airport with both of our daughters in attendance to that, right? So you could just imagine how traumatic that was for them and how traumatic that was for me, because I'm the third party on the phone going through it all and just listening to everything that's taken place. And that alone just brought shock into my body, right? Like, in one moment, I was talking with him on the phone, and 20 minutes later, the person you're talking to is no longer here. And it does something to the brain where the brain doesn't even register like what just happened, right? And I instantly went into shock. Like, I noticed the system, my bodily system just were starting to act and behave in ways that were synonymous with being in shock. And I was unpacking, right? Like, before it all happened, I was unpacking my suitcase. I was dancing in my room. I was preparing for the three of them to come home. And then I had to switch gears and pack again for a different reason, right? And so the whole experience, and this was in August 2nd, was the date that he passed away. And that was in 2017. And that whole experience, I had never experienced panic attacks before, anxiety. I didn't even know what PTSD was. And in a matter of days, I had all three. And it scared me so much because, you know, as a yoga teacher, I only knew calmness and peace, right? Because that was my practice. And here I am now having this completely different experience in this body. And it scared me so much. I'm like, what's happening? To the point where I thought something was wrong with me and I was going to die, which added even more fear on top of the fear that I was already in. So, you know, your topic on resiliency and grief, right? Because grief can come in so many different ways. It's not just the loss of a loved one, right? We lose a house, we break up with a partner, we get divorced, our pet dies. You know, grief has so many different faces. But we're all having the experience in this physical body. This is where grief is playing out. It's not playing out somewhere out there. It's actually playing out right in here. And you know, I'm just going to be honest and transparent and vulnerable. I actually didn't know if I was going to make it through it. Yeah. It was touch and go for a long time for me.
Yeah, I don't think that you're alone in that, right? Like, now in your work where you help people move through grief, is that something that you often see and hear from the people that you work with?
Oh, 100%. So many people who have lost loved ones, they want to be where their loved ones are. And that's part, which is completely normal. Like, you want to die as well. You want to go where you want to be where they're at. And that's very normal. So I always tell my clients that I was like, okay, this is a normal attribute of the grieving process. And it's intense, right? Because it's not just the grief of the loss that you're experiencing. What I have found also, it's all the other unprocessed griefs that we have that we're also feeling at the same time. Right. And so when I was 10 years old, I also lost my father unexpectedly and suddenly.
Mhm.
And so at 10, I didn't know how to grieve at 10 years old. And so when my husband died, the whole unprocessed grief of losing my dad also came up. And so here I was grieving two men who I loved, and it was like a double whammy inside of me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine it. And first of all, thank you for sharing the story. This is the third or fourth time that I've heard your story, and I had goosebumps the entire time I've heard it. I mean, it never truly sinks in how,
Yeah.
the fact that you were at a training in Thailand days before,
Mm-hmm.
in a way planning for that. I mean, the way that the world set things up in such a way for you to be, I mean, for lack of a better word, prepared as best
Prepared.
as you can be,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I had the same reaction, right? I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, come on. I was like, so my conversation with God, I'm like, really? Is this the way you want to initiate me into this work? I was like, nah, I'm not liking that. I was like, there could have been a different way.
Yeah.
And so I was angry at God for a long time, right? Like, I have a pretty intimate relationship with God, and it's very personal to me. And so I wasn't afraid to be angry with God and to have that discussion and to bring that forward, because there is a lot of anger that is also part of the grieving process. And we tend to want to keep that anger inside. And I'm not prone to anger. It's a new emotion for me, if I'm being honest, because I'm always pretty soft and pretty calm. But when you're steeped in that deep grief, it's like you can't even control it. It's like the Hulk coming out of you, right?
Right.
And yeah, it was so surreal for me. I'm like, did that really happen? Right? Like, I think I had that way for about 3 years. Did that really happen? Right? Because it was like just watching a movie. This is someone else's life. It's not my life. No way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
I find like so fascinating is prior to this event happening, you were saying that you didn't really, anger wasn't something that, was a regular thing in your life as a yoga teacher and that sort of thing. And I think it's so interesting as like a very like blunt reminder about how important it is like to have like the polarity of emotions, right? Like to really see
Yes.
this is an opportunity to kind of open your eyes to kind of the reality of living, that there is the yin and the yang. Talk to us a little bit about kind of that journey for you on how that was, and kind of really starting to say, actually it's okay that I'm feeling what I'm feeling. This is not wrong or bad. But I think sometimes people, and I think in your case as a yoga teacher, it might have even been more extreme, right? Like we don't get angry, we don't like, kind of like this idea.
Right.
And yet the truth of the matter is we do, and it's okay, and find a way to be able to express it in the healthiest way possible. So I'm so curious about like how that journey really manifested for you.
Well, Jen, I think what you bring up is so super important. And the word that sticks out there for me is polarity. I think as a society, we tend to think that it's bad to be angry, that
Mhm.
if I get angry, I'm not being a good person. And that can really mess with our mental health too, right? Because it
Mhm.
means that we're packing and contracting all of this energy in without any room or space for it to move out of us,
Yeah.
right? And so, for me, I'll be vulnerable here. I'll give you an example of how this first manifested for me. This might have been a couple weeks after he died. And I walked into our shared closet, and I'm standing there, and I see his clothes, I see my clothes, and then I go back to his clothes, and this rage came over me. It just came out like suddenly, this rage. And I tore into that closet and I pulled all of his clothes off the hangers, just ripped everything out. It was the most cathartic thing. And I'm sobbing and I'm crying and I'm angry at him. How could you die? How could you leave me? And I just kept pulling and ripping his clothes off the hangers until I was completely spent. And I just laid on the closet floor, sobbing, crying, but feeling this sense of deep release in my body.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I realized, this is what I hadn't done before. I hadn't given myself permission to express anger. I was speaking the anger, but I wasn't actually expressing the anger physically.
Yeah.
And anger is not a bad thing. How we utilize it might be seen as something that's not bad, but we're human beings. We live in a wilderness. And in the wilderness, there are different beasts in the wilderness. And we have to give ourselves permission to experience and express the polarity of it all. When we don't, we get stuck in the one. Right? And so one of the things I'm always doing with my clients is giving them permission to find that thing that hasn't been expressed yet. Let's work on expressing it. So a lot of it would be some somatic work. Where is this feeling, emotion in your body? And then we'll do breath work. Let's find that, let's express it. And the moment you do, it's like your energy gates just open up. There's transformation happening. Right? So it's not about cutting something out or, killing something off. All we're doing is transforming energy from one state to the next. And when you actually look at the frequency or the resonancy of emotions on the chart, anger is not even at the bottom. Apathy is. Right? And so anger is a catalyst for change. And I think especially as women, we tend to think that we have to have it all together and that we shouldn't be angry. What would other people say if they saw me angry? Who cares? Right? This is an opportunity for us to be so brutally honest with who we are as human beings, to be vulnerable, to tap into that inner space where the ache is and to hold it. It's like, how I see it now is I'm learning how to reparent all of me. Yeah. And in that reparenting, that means that if I am angry, I can hold my anger and I can walk with it. I can have a sacred relationship with this anger. Because if I don't do that, if I don't give myself permission to feel, that means that particular emotion is now going to become a shadow. And I want to tend to every aspect of me, not to push it away. And I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned in this grieving process is how to be more open and accepting and inviting to every aspect of me. Yeah. So, and I really love that because before, I thought I was awake before. This whole grief experience has completely showed me something different.
Well, I think, honestly, you were awake on the one end, right? When you talk about like the polarity to really open up. So what's really interesting is like, I have a very different experience where as a youngster and growing up, I was really expressive and, anger and a lot of emotions came through me just based on things I experienced as a child. And the more that I have done self-exploration and personal development, the more I'm starting to open up to this other beautiful love, like this other kind of more, warm. And so it's been really fascinating because I didn't realize along my journey that it would start kind of breaking open and cracking open something that, I didn't realize, just like, prior to, your accident, you didn't realize it wasn't that there was something missing, right? Until like you have something in life just force itself on you and you kind of realize how important it is to allow what is there. So I really appreciate that. And did you, because I know, for me and so many others, they always say the journey, the process is non-linear. Can you talk to a little bit kind of that process, not just, with grief, but just in general, the process of recognizing that, there's going to be some ups and there's going to be some downs, and continuing to kind of keep that momentum going forward.
Yeah. Yes, none of this experience we're having is a linear experience, right? It's especially with something like grief and grief and love, because the two goes together. They're hand in hand. They're like brothers and sisters for me sometimes. You can, it's been August will make 6 years since he transitioned, and I'm in a completely different place now than I was, of course, the first year, the second year, even the third year. Is grief still there? 100%, right? Well, what has happened now as I walk with grief is that I've befriended grief in my life. We're good friends now. And what that means is when something comes up, a feeling comes up, or I listen to a song, or I'm reminded, or I get a whiff of his scent, which happens sometimes, and it'll bring back this yearning and this desire for him, and I'll start to cry and I'll feel sadness. I give myself to it completely in that moment because that's what's coming up, right? And so I don't think it matters how many years someone has been gone in your life, you're still going to feel the grief of that person not being here. It is not a linear experience. Love is not a linear experience. And so because we are multidimensional beings, we're also working emotionally on a multidimensional level as well. And so it isn't like point A and I'm going to get to point B. It really doesn't work that way. And so you begin to grow with grief. You begin to walk with grief. There's no getting over grief, which I think so many people think, oh yeah, I'm over it. And it's not about being over it, but what is grief inviting you into? And I have found that grief, and I've said this, grief has been my guru, has been the great transformer in my life, because I chose to lean into it versus leaning out of it. And by giving myself permission to say yes to these deep, scary emotions and to completely gut myself open, which is basically what I did. I chose to go in, I chose not to self-medicate, which would have been, a route that I could have gone. My doctors did give me Xanax and all these things. And yes, sometimes those things are needed. So don't even shame yourself if you need that, right? But I want us to ask, to become more curious. What has grief invited me into? What is it desiring me to see about myself, to see how I've been living, to see what life is all about? And so much of that is we tend not to want to have discussions about death, and yet we're all headed in that direction. And so the biggest gift, and I thank Hassel all the time, because he has given me a new life. This woman that I'm becoming now, she's badass.
Yeah.
She's just friggin' badass. So hopefully I can say that on here.
100%.
Because there's a level of confidence that I have in myself that I didn't have before. And there's a level of zest for life that I have now that I didn't have before. But it took his death for me to have a deeper appreciation for life.
Yeah.
Life isn't perfect. It never has been. It never will be. But what it's gifted me with is the fact that I have choice, and choice is my superpower. And in every day when I wake up, if I'm blessed and honored from God to open my eyes and to sense my breath and to feel my body, I can ask myself the question, what am I going to choose today for myself? How am I going to choose to feel? What is my why?
Love that. Yeah.
And that for me is like, okay, that's a drop mic moment for me. It's like, okay, I get it. I get
Yeah, it's like
it.
I see it now, like it's
Yes.
so like just beautiful and just, kind of so inspiring to see how, going from something that is traumatic and tragic, but yet truly like learning from the gifts that, have been kind of presented to you from that opportunity. Like you said, choosing not to go down that path of all the other things, that so many people I think sometimes find themselves in, where they, let grief turn them into, something very different. And so I think it's just very beautiful, and it's so brave of you. Like I'm just listening to you, just thinking, she's my hero. you know,
Yeah.
it's so inspiring. So thank you so much.
Ah, I mean, you're welcome. It's and but I just want the listeners to know that I didn't get here overnight. Like the first 2 to 3 years were really, really tough for me. I mean, I felt like I wasn't even, I didn't have a home in my body. I felt like I was just tiny molecules floating in space. The PTSD was really rough. I didn't have anything to put that up against in my experience of things that I knew. And so that was so new for me, the psychotic thoughts that I would have, the dark thoughts. And it scared me because I'm like, who is this person having these thoughts? Like, am I an evil person? Like, all of these things would go through my mind. I'm a bad person. I'm having these horrible thoughts about people that I love. But I'm so grateful that I had this training as a spiritual director, this training as a yoga teacher, my training as a shaman, because it kept pulling me back to the present moment. Oh, these are not thoughts and you're not your thoughts.
Yeah.
Like every moment I would have them, I would recognize, I was like, oh wow, thoughts would scare me, but then I would say in the same moment, oh, and you're not your thoughts. These thoughts, they're not real. They're all because of, neurotransmitters that are out of whack. And my neurotransmitters were out of whack. My dopamine level was so low. My cortisol levels were so high. And part of putting myself together again, like Humpty Dumpty, was doing all of that part, right? Like going and get sort of advanced blood work done, checking out where my neurotransmitters were, because I'm like, this is not normal. I'm not sleeping. I'm waking up in the middle of the night with panic attacks. And so I had to make sure that I was doing my sort of due diligence with doing all the medical stuff as well. And meditation was very helpful for me. I kind of threw the whole kitchen sink at myself. I was getting acupuncture, massage, chiropractic work, movement, you name it, kitchen sink it.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of one of our earlier series, actually, as part of this, 5-part series this month, where we talk about just allowing yourself to listen to your body and what you need, and just that kind of self-awareness, like allowing yourself to feel and allowing yourself to do what you know you need to do. I mean, it's so interesting how that plays into everything. It plays into regular life, just your everyday life, as well as when you're dealing with grief and with crisis. And one other thing that's coming up for me as you speak, and we've talked about this a little bit, is just about how different relationships play into the grieving process. So, in your case, there's of course your relationship with Hassel, your husband, and both as a life and death doula, helping him along the process. And also, I mean, I think it's so beautiful that you still have a relationship with him today. You celebrate his birthday today. So, that's so beautiful. And there's that relationship. There's a relationship with your children who, you had to help them through their own grieving process while you yourself were grieving. I can't imagine what that was. And relationship with yourself, dealing with with your own feelings and how to get through it, and relationship with God, like you mentioned, and relationship just with the world. And I was hoping you could talk more about that.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a very big topic that doesn't get a lot of traction, so to speak, but your relationships with people will change when you're in deep grief. I have found that people don't want to be around people who are in grief. People don't want to be around sad people. And so you'll have some friends that'll drop off because they don't want to be around someone who's in grief. I think sometimes there's a part of them that's afraid to see that. I think sometimes it's a reminder of, oh my God, this could be me. And they also don't know how to attend to someone who's in grief. Like, what do I do? What do I do to help them?
Right.
So I had that. And I also had to create some healthy boundaries for myself with certain friends as well, because there are certain, and everyone was coming from a really good place. They were well-intentioned, but, I had a couple of friends who's like, oh, you ought to get over this and go back to work and do this. And I'm like, but that's not what I need.
Yeah.
And I need for you to not rush me to go back and into a state of doing. I was like, what I need is just to be here with what I'm feeling. So that changed. My relationship with, my kids, of course, changed as well. I think we've become a lot closer. They're in college. The youngest one graduated from college. The eldest is still in school. But how I see them and how I relate to them have changed. I don't take life for granted anymore. I think the three of us understand that life could end at any moment. And so this relationship with life is about, one, at the end of the day, I want to make sure that there's nothing between me or anyone else that's kind of hanging out there in the fringe, right? That if there's something that needed to be patched up, something that needed to be forgiven, that's all done. And so my relationship with people, I think, have become so much more, is the word I want to use. It's bigger. It's like a garden where there are all of these different blooms in the garden, and each one gets tended to in a very loving way. I had to create boundaries with my family. Normally, I would be the go-to person everyone would come to for advice. And I had no bandwidth to give anyone advice. And so I would tell my siblings, my sisters, I can't do this with you right now. It's not personal. Please don't take it personal. I just don't have the bandwidth to listen to your issues or your problems. My plate is full. So I think it's important for people who are in grief to set healthy boundaries for themselves, because you don't really have anything inside of you to give. And I tend to be an overgiver and overpleaser by nature. I have so worked on that in these last 5 years because I just couldn't give the way I used to give anymore. And that's one of the beautiful French benefits of my grieving process, is that I've learned to pull back, to say no, and to even pause and notice the reaction in my body when someone asks me to do something. And I'll always say, now, let me get back to you on that. Let me see how that feels inside of me. And so it's like, when I teach yoga class, I'm reminding my yoga students that you have a technology. These things that we call our smartphones, they're not the original technology. Your body is the original technology. Right? And so if we can, begin to just do the work to go in and ask the body first, how does this resonate with you? Is this something that we want to do? And particularly in any grief or trauma that we might be in, I think it's important for us to really tap in and give ourselves permission to say no. And I have not always been good with creating healthy boundaries for myself. Again, I'm just being transparent, because I've always wanted to, please. I was over pleaser. And it's not something that I do anymore because I simply can't. I still don't have the bandwidth to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, but one of the other things that stands out when you talk about that is, I believe some part of a big part of it, and what we talked about at the beginning, how the timing was so wild that it was just after that training in Thailand. I think it's interesting how much the universe prepares us for certain events. And this all comes back to, I guess, listening to yourself and what you need. And if we all know that, unfortunately, the reality of life is that we will have hardships, we will lose people. That is just a reality of living. What kinds of things can people prepare now? Obviously, you mentioned kind of making sure those relationships are all fine, there aren't loose ends and relationships and that kind of thing. But I'm just wondering what else you would say to people who maybe don't feel prepared to deal with crisis, and what can we do to make sure that we're in our best resilient state leading up to things like that?
Yeah, great question. There are a couple of things. I mean, even though I had been working with people who were dying before he died, I'd helped a couple friends transition, and I was working at a hospice, volunteering at a hospice, and then taking this course. None of that really prepared me either for the suddenness of it, especially when it's sudden, right? And unexpected like that. But I do think there are a couple of things that we can do. And one of the first thing is start communicating and having conversations with your family members. Talk about death. I know it sounds completely morbid, but it really isn't morbid. It's necessary. Because if we don't talk about it when it happens, we're shocked. Oh my God, so-and-so died. Yeah, people die. So I think talking about it, get to know what your loved one wants. Like Hassel and I hadn't even talked about how he wanted to be buried, but it was no coincidence that he actually died in his country of Trinidad and Tobago. So for me, that was his sole choosing where he wanted to be buried. And so the girls and I made a decision to bury him in his country, which was the right decision. We didn't bring him back to the States. So I would say talk to each other about death. What are your fears? What are your thoughts on death? What scares you about it? Another thing, talk about, do you have a will? Do you have life insurance? These are things that people don't think about, but particularly the life insurance, it's so important. I'm so grateful that he had life insurance. And I remember us having a conversation a couple weeks even before he died. I don't know, just these random conversations. I just told him, I was like, if I die, I have life insurance. I just want you to know. And he said, well, if I die, you and the girls will be fine. You'll be taken care of. So I think talking about it, make sure you're doing planning. I have a workbook that's a end of life planning workbook. Fill it out. Like, what do you want on your special day? Write your eulogy. Don't let somebody else write your eulogy. Do that now. And sometimes we need some assistance with this. And so even talking to your pastor or your therapist, whatever it may be. But I think it's about really getting very close to yourself and asking yourself the questions that you might be most scared of. I might have all of this work and see this work differently, but I have people, I love my children. I can't even imagine my children dying. But yet I have to go there because I know it will happen, whether I go first or they go first. I don't know what the future holds, but again, it's part of the reason why I try to live my life as fully in the moment as possible. But I think the biggest thing is that we need to have more conversations on death and dying.
You know what I think is so, I agree with that so much. And I found it really interesting because there's almost like this kind of separation between, we need to live in the now. We need to embrace the present moment, right? And then we also need to prepare for the future, and
Yes.
recognizing kind of the importance of both, right? Like to
Yes.
be proactive about what could happen. And this is like so good to hear for the listeners about like having that, proactive mindset of what could happen is not you, just catastrophizing everything. It's really
Right.
about like kind of recognizing the importance and the empowerment that you can gain from thinking through the different options. And so I'm
Oh,
curious, like you're kind of like, yeah, I'm curious
yeah.
thoughts about that, because that is something that I know I work in HR, and many of the people who are on this call today are in human resources. And that is something that I think on the professional side, we really struggle with, right? Like to not kind of get caught up in that. So I'm going to stop. I'm totally curious about your
The,
thoughts.
this is such a big topic that is not spoken enough of. I mean, when he died, I had just closed the yoga studio. I had no income coming in for myself,
Mhm.
none whatsoever. Now, he was a financial planner, so he worked in business, he worked in finances. And when we came home after burying him in Tobago, everything, and it was all, invested in his company. All his life insurance was waiting for me. The paperwork was waiting for me at home when I got there. And I can't tell you how incredibly happy I was that, okay, there's money here. We're going to be okay. Otherwise, I have no idea how we would have done it. I would have had to, of course, find a job doing whatever. I might have gone back into teaching high school, which is what I did before moving here to North Carolina. Um, but I was so grateful that my husband had the fortitude to take out life insurance and to bless us in the way that he did by leaving. But he did not have a will. He was 45 when he died. He wasn't thinking he was going to die. But what that prepared for me, like I kept getting panic attacks about what if I die next? Do I have my affairs in order? What's going to happen to the kids? And so one of the very first thing I did, I got a will. I was like, I have to get this done. At the time, my youngest was still 16, so she was a minor. So I had to put in provisions. Okay, who do I want to take care of her? Right? And parents don't think about these things, especially if you have really young children and you pass away and you're a single parent. Who are you leaving? Who's going to be the guardian for that child? And so I think these are, again, in conversations we don't want to have, but
Mhm.
conversations we should have. Like if you have bank accounts and you die, do you have it set up to have where that money goes to someone that you love? Otherwise, the bank keeps it. Like I didn't know that. And I'm like, oh, nope, I don't want the bank to have my money. So, I've already gone to the bank and I'm like, nope, I want all of these accounts going to this person, that person, whatever. And so it's important to do these things. Life insurance, will, you have to do those things. They're uncomfortable conversations, but please have them because funerals are so expensive. Um, when you are in grief, you want to be able to, as much as you're able to be able to relax into that grief and be with the grief versus, oh my God, I have to rush back and go to work and make money. Because now you're not able to sit with the grief and process it. Now you're split. There's a division where you now have to take yourself and focus on something completely different. And the beautiful part of my journey was because he had left life insurance, I was able to take months off to just be by myself and to be with my children. And that was an amazing gift to receive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm curious kind of from Jen mentioned that a lot of the people on the call today are in HR, and I'm curious your thoughts on, in a working environment, how to set up better conversations about dealing with grief and kind of helping people, nudging people towards being, prepared in the senses that you mentioned, like setting up a will and life insurance and those kinds of things, and not being afraid of those conversations. What would you say from that perspective, like in a company environment, how to help make that better conversation?
Well, I think companies have to pivot, right? I mean, your employees can't all be about producing, right? I think companies are in a position now, I hope, where they can elevate themselves and also elevate their employees. And by elevating, I mean, what is your offering to your employees? Don't just expect them to come in and do the work for you, but what are you offering them in return? And so maybe, invite people to come in maybe once a quarter, whatever it might be, to speak on these types of things, right? Where they're getting a different, it's being outsourced, but they're getting a different viewpoint. And for me, that will show, oh, my company cares about me, right? They're invested in my well-being. They have these workshops that are free that I can take, someone that can come in and help me do end of life planning, whatever it is. I mean, most companies honestly have the resources. And I would like to see corporations elevating themselves, elevating their employees, and actually saying, look, we do care about you. I mean, if nothing else, the pandemic showed us that, what's the reality of life, right? And so I would hope that HR and CEOs and people who are head executives can create a shift like this and pivot away from just expecting your employees to show up and work for you, but actually giving back to your employees as well.
Yeah.
It's so important. It's so important, because your employees are people. They're human beings that have families that die, family members that die, family members that are going through all sorts of things. Don't just see them, like really see them. See their humanity. That's the thing. It's like, see their humanity, not just someone who clocks in and clocks out. See them beyond that.
I agree completely. I see we have about 12 minutes left. So I want to open up any space for anyone on the call to ask any questions that you might have, or, I saw a lot of activity in the chat of just
go to the chat and see what's there.
Yeah, just people appreciating the conversation. And so thank you everyone in the chat for that. So yeah, now is the time. If you do have questions, please ask those now. And Esha, anything else that you want to cover before, in the last 12 minutes as well, for that?
I'm going through a little bit of the conversation here, and Sharon said here, boundaries are so important in times of profound grief. I found Glennon Doyle's quote, which I love her, very helpful. What we are in need are patient, loving witnesses, people to sit quietly and hold space for us, people who will stand with us and not try to fix anything. 100%. There's nothing that needs to be fixed here. We're grieving. Just hold that sacred space for us. Just be there, listen, give me permission to maybe put my head on your shoulder, whatever it may be. There's nothing that needs to be done. I just wrote a social media post that talked about being broken open versus being broken, right? At the core of my essential self, I'm not broken, but I have been broken open by some of these experiences that I've lived. And so it's given oneself permission, the person on the other side, seeing this, whether it's a friend or family member who's going through grief, just really be there for that person. And it's okay not to know. And the other thing is, Don't ask what do you need? They don't know what they need. They're in grief.
Right.
So be brave enough to say, I'm going to bring you some food, I'm going to bring you some flowers, whatever it may be. I'm going to come and rub your feet. I love having my feet rubbed. I'm going to come and do some small act of kindness. Be brave enough to put yourself in the same space with someone who is going through grief. What would you learn about yourself? Don't run from the uncomfortability of a situation. There's something there. There's some great gem there waiting for you. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's okay not to have the answers. I think you had said something earlier that really hit home to me around how difficult and challenging it is for loved ones and family to be able to show up for us, and vice versa, right? When there is such a traumatic type situation and we're going through something. And I think the more that we can normalize and say it's okay not to have all the answers. We as a society think we need to fix it constantly. I have a husband who's a software engineer. I can't talk to him about anything because that's just the way his brain works, is constantly trying to fix it. And I think as a society, that's something that we need to practice, is being able to just slow down and just be okay to be with it. Wouldn't you agree?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%. I mean, I love my stillness practice now. Like, it's one of the most important things for me to just be still and do nothing. We do too much, we think too much, and it's always about do, which is very yang energy in our society. We want to fix things. We want to drive through a solution to things, right? Well, what's the fastest, quickest way that I can get out of this? And grief is not something that you're gonna have a drive-through experience with. I promise you, it's not gonna happen that way. Grief is always gonna have the last word here, and it's really beautiful. My relationship with death and grief has shifted so much, and it's an honored experience as a human being to give myself permission to feel all the different flavors of what it means to be human. And it goes back to what you said, Jen. It's like, can I hold the polarity that this life is going to give to me?
Yeah.
In one moment, I might be feeling deep grief. In another moment, well, what's the opposite of that? Oh, there's so much joy here. Where is the joy? And I think initially with my grief, I was like, oh my God, there's no joy. And then I happened to be watching a stand-up comic. This was maybe a couple months after he died. And I heard myself laughing. And it dawned on me, wow, wait a minute. Grief and joy can coexist.
Yeah.
Like, wow. It was like a bomb went off of me, like just realizing that, oh, this isn't just about one or the other. It's not about this or that. It's this and that. Both are possible and both actually do exist at the same time.
And I
And that's a
wonder, like that first time that, you had that laugh, I think instinctually there's almost like this, like kind of inner questioning. Is that wrong? Like,
is that
is this a problem? And
exactly.
I'm curious, like how you kind of like, worked through that to say, yes, it's actually okay that both exist simultaneously.
Yes, and that's so good because we do this thing where we feel guilty about being happy and joyful when we've gone through loss. And I always remind myself and always remind my clients that one, this is what your loved one would want for you. And two, you are deserving of it, and both exist. And so it's having this shattering the stigma. I think it goes back to your title here, that we can look and have now a different perspective of what it means to be human, what it means to be in grief, that it's not about just this one thing, but it's about all the things that are right here for us to partake of, right? You can think about it. I like to envision being invited to a feast, and there's a huge table, and on this table there are all of these different assortments of meats, sweet foods, drinks, you name it, it's on this table, it's a feast, and all of it belongs, right? And so it's not a matter of, we don't have to shame or guilt ourselves into just being one way. And it goes back to the multidimensional aspect of ourselves. And just do the question, which part of me is feeling guilty about actually being joyful? The self-inquiry is important, that we do that with ourselves, and just notice the response that comes up. Which part of you is feeling that way? And then you're not shaming that part of you either, right? It's like, oh, it's the little girl in me that's feeling guilty, or it's this part of me that's feeling guilty, or it's the messages that I might have heard from my parents, right? Or maybe this is the way I saw my mother grieve. And so getting to the point of knowing which aspect of you is actually feeling the guilt is really, really important. And then just being compassionate to that part of you. Yeah. I want to do grief differently. I'm not going to wear black. Matter of fact, when he died, I could not stand the color black. Didn't want to see the color black. And I wanted color.
Yeah.
I wanted color in my life. And so, I think it's about us kind of flipping these things on top of its head and seeing that there is a different way in how we can dance with life and dance with all of these different parts that life will give to us. There's a new paradigm here for us to take hold of, and we don't have to grieve in the old ways that our parents or their parents did before them. And especially as women, I have a podcast called Not a Widow But a Goddess. I refuse to call myself a widow. Why? Because when I think of the word widow, I think of some old woman that's, wearing black, that's locked up somewhere, not engaged in life anymore. And I'm like, no, that's not who I am. I am a goddess. One of my good friends, she's like, oh no, honey, you're a born again goddess. I'm like, what's that? I like that. What is that? But the whole idea of not a widow but a goddess is listening to the stories, having these women tell their stories of loss, and also embracing the fullness of life that they still have within themselves. Right? Life is still there for these women. And how can we still allow that life to continue to bloom and blossom in us? So yeah, not a widow but a goddess.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that. Yeah, and I
Kind of
love the
bold.
idea of too, just kind of feeling and recognizing, where you are and what you need and how you see yourself, and and being okay with that without judgment, because I think that's where so many people fall into. You even mentioned that at one point that you were questioning your own thoughts if you were a bad person, and I think it's so inspiring how you've kind of navigated through that and gotten to such a place where you're so so self-aware and powerful. I mean, I love everything about your story, everything that you share, everything that you stand for, and just thank you.
Oh, thank you, Christy. It's definitely been it's been in the making. And I really will say it's a courageous and brave act to say yes, to continue to say yes to life.
Yeah.
It really, really is, because when you go through big losses and sudden losses, it just rips everything out from you. It really does. It's not anything that I would wish for anyone, because the road and the journey is intense, and yet it is laden with possibilities at the same time. And my bravery is to fall in the sword of love over and over again. There's nothing I would change. I'm going to continue to love. I'm going to continue to open myself to love, knowing that, yeah, there's going to be some hurt in there at some point too. Yeah. But I think that's why I chose this human experience too, right? It's why we all chose this human experience, is is to taste love, to, you know, to be with it, to hold it, its fragrance. We want more of it. And that's what I want. I want more. I want more of love. I want to bathe in it, you know. It's and to know that I am it. And to also have an experience of not just knowing my husband on a physical level, right? I've known him on a physical level for the 24 years that we were together, but now I'm having an opportunity to know him from a different level, the spiritual dimension that we tend not to. So our relationship has shifted, but we still have a relationship, and that's been very helpful for me in my grief. Yeah, to switch gears, so to speak. Yeah, shift gears. So I'm super, super grateful for grief, and I wrote The Wisdom of Grief. If anyone wants, it's like the first year of my grieving process. It's really like my journal and notes. They can find it on Amazon, or they can get it through me directly as well. But The Wisdom of Grief, and if anyone is ever in need, you know, you can visit my website, soulalchemy.com. And it's alchemy with an I at the end, not a Y. And for those of you that are listening and are going through that, or know someone who is going through that, you know, they say time really does heal, and that's true to a point. But what I have found in my own process, and the biggest gift that I could have given myself, is kindness, patience, and compassion. Yeah, those are the three things that really help to assist me: kindness, patience, and compassion. Not knowing what the next day would look like, or the day after that, but trusting. I do this thing with my breath now where when I inhale, it's an allowing breath, to allow whatever is happening in my direct space, in my environment, in my experience, to say yes to that and be okay with that. And then the out breath is all about a trust. It's a trusting breath. So inhale and allowing. Inhale, I allow life. Exhale, and I trust life, right? And so that could be just a reminder for yourself.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna incorporate that today. So thank you, Esha. And I'm seeing we are a few minutes over. It's hard because it's very easy to get lost in conversation with you, Esha. I think, you know, everything you say, for me at least, is so profound, and I find myself every time we speak being covered in goosebumps half the time we're talking, because I am constantly in awe with the way that you connect with the world and with yourself, and I'm just very grateful to know you and to have you here. So thank you very, very much, Esha.
Thank you, Christy, for having me.
Of course.
Yes, thank you so much. I think, you know, if it's grief, or, you know, really any kind of significant emotion that we can face in our lives, I think to end on kind of the power of, you know, kindness and compassion, and what was the third one? Patience. I mean, like, that to me is such a great way to summarize like how we can best show up in our lives when we're dealing with like incredible turbulence, whatever that looks like. So thank you so, so much for your time today. I think you've made an impact on me personally, and I have no doubt that you've made an impact on everyone on the call today. So thank you. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up our conversation today. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have an incredible rest of your day.
Yeah,
Thank you
so
both.
much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.